All right, my good friends, this is Mr. Davis. This is Ed Puzzle I made for you guys for my geography classes. We gotta kind of hit the reset button here because of the fact that we've been gone for in class, out of class. You don't have your books in them, you do have your books in them, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to kind of regroup. So just let's go over what we're talking about. So we're in Latin America right now. We took notes last week. Said Mexico is technically part of North America. Uh, but we call it Central America. Central America goes down from Mexico to Panama. Panama connects here to South America. So basically three regions we break this up into. Central America, we're going to talk about the islands, and then we're also going to talk about this big bad boy right here, South America. Interesting part about South America, I always say it's 13 countries because we always make you label French Guiana on the map. But French Guiana is a French territory, hence French Guiana. We learned this when we watched a crazy geographic video about Brazil last week and how like the northernmost point of Brazil is closer to Canada than they are to their southernmost point of Brazil. So there was a kind of a crazy video about Brazil, and you see how gigantic Brazil almost borders everyone in South America except for two countries. What would those two countries be? And you're right, it is Ecuador and Chile. They do not border those two Western South American nations. And here we have the Galapagos Islands. It's where Charles Darwin was out there studying the tortoises out there and comes up with the theory of natural selection. So that is a region of Ecuador. Down here are the Falkland Islands, and that's actually, if you remember from the videos, the Falkland Islands they're a British territory. They're a self-governing British territory, meaning like the British doesn't really get involved in their affairs. Technically, it's their territory, but Argentina wanted to take it away back in the 80s, and that did not go well. Here's a blank map of South America. It's out of the three that we have to memorize. South America this is the hardest of the three because it's the most. But I think in general we'll get the Western Hemisphere much easier than the Eastern Hemisphere because the Eastern Hemisphere has Europe, Africa, and Asia, and that's where the majority of the world's countries are in the Western Hemisphere because you have so many gigantic nations in the majority of the countries in the world are in the Eastern Hemisphere because in the West we have several countries that take up a gigantic amount of land. When you have Canada, and you have the United States, Mexico is gigantic, Brazil is gigantic down here. And just in general, these nations in South America are bigger than a lot of the tinier nations in Africa. Okay, so we're going to talk about the climate regions here. This is kind of the nuts and bolts, ho-hum part of the course here. It's a wide range. We saw that with Mexico, how they have it's desert up here by our border, but down here, as it gets more into the heart of Central America, it's rich rainforest. So they have deserts, they have rainforests, they have grassland. A lot of the world's beef, some of the richest beef steak in the world comes from Brazil. Bruno Bravo is a Brazilian steakhouse in downtown Cincinnati. A really expensive place to go and eat. And it's a Brazilian steakhouse because it's known for their meat and their cattle grazing. Now, much of Latin America lies in what's called the low latitudes, and basically we mean from the Tropic of Cancer to the Tropic of Capricorn. That's what we mean by the low latitudes, meaning low in number, like 10 degrees south, 20 degrees south, 10 degrees north, 20 degrees north. That's what we mean by the low latitudes, between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Most of the region is what you would think of when you want to go somewhere on vacation, nice and warm. A lot of beach in all these countries, like Central America. Every single country has a coastline. South America, every single country has a coastline besides our good friends in Bolivia and the Paraguayans. So the only two countries down there doesn't have coastline. And then obviously up here, there are islands. So the whole entire country, it has a beach. So you see a lot of vacation tourism is a huge industry in this area. In the rainforest, I call it the Amazon rainforest is the lungs of the world because of all the oxygen that is produced. Unfortunately, the Amazon rainforest is getting destroyed at an alarming rate. It's crazy how fast it's being destroyed. And we'll go over a little lesson on that. But like football fields, like a minute are being destroyed in the Amazon rainforest. Big problem in Brazil is that they have a huge, gigantic population. It's not none of the South American countries really are known for having. I mean, they're not third world countries, but they have a lot of rural, illiterate citizens, and when you have that, you have people that turn to what's called subsistence farming, which is farming to sustain yourself. And when you do that, you see a lot of bad farming practices, and the people are using what's called slash and burn farming, where they go out and, like, if my cursor's on this bee, and they cut down Brazil, hit it. They cut down this bee, and then they go further, and they cut all that stuff down, and then they go further in. And slash and burn farming is like a vicious cycle because you cut down the trees, you set them on fire, the ash comes down, is very nutrient rich soil. However, it's only good for a couple growing seasons, and then you have to keep going further. All right, so there's a lot of rainforest, Amazon rainforest, of course, being the biggest. In the rainforest, you're going to have hot temperatures and abundant rainfall year-round, kind of like Groundhog's Day, like same thing over and over and over. They're in South America, they're at the bottom of the world, so they're in their summertime, whereas we are in our winter. And for them, like, more, it's temperatures stay pretty much pretty mild and hot throughout the year, and then the precipitation is what changes from season to season. So most southeastern South America, the winters are short and mild. Summers are long and humid. Sometimes in some of these places, there's no dry period. It just rains all the time. And this picture here is from Christ the Redeemer from Rio de Janeiro. And that's one of the most famous statues. Catholicism is a big religion in all of Central, South, and the islands. All those areas are major Roman Catholics because of the Spanish conquistadors. And Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese. They also practice Roman Catholicism. Okay, the deserts, believe it or not, there's a lot of deserts in this region in general. And even in South America, in Chile, there's a desert. It's called the Atacama Desert. I'm not going to watch this because I'm just not confident how it's going to translate up onto the screen and mess my lecture up. But this was a story about these miners got trapped underneath the Atacama Desert, and they were down there for like 70 days. Very close and similar day length that the people our rugby team that crashed on top of the Andes Mountains. Really funny, not really funny for either group. But one was on top of the world, one was below the world, and one group was in the Atacama Desert, and there's a lot of minerals down there, a lot of drilling that takes place. One of the driest places on the whole entire world is the Atacama Desert, and again, not a place I'd probably want to go on vacation to. They use these Spanish terms called Tierra Caliente, Tierra Templada, and Tierra Fria. Now, I should have a graph here, but basically it has to do with sea level. The closer you are to sea level in South America, the hotter you're going to be. And the higher up you are from sea level, the more, you know, the colder you're going to be, especially when you get up to the Andes Mountains. Now, geographers and scientists say every time you raise 1,000 feet in elevation, you lose 3 degrees in temperature. I think I told one of the classes a story. I was in Gatlinburg, and we went from downtown Gatlinburg, where all the shops are, a pretty wild place, walking around there. We went. I like to hike when I go to Gatlinburg. I don't like to shop. Just not, in it for the shopping. I want to go out and get outdoors with Mother Nature. And we went to Klingman's Dome, which is a hike um, about a half hour from downtown Gatlinburg. And when we left downtown Gatlinburg, it was 70. We went up in elevation by like 7,000 feet or so. Maybe not, maybe 6,000 feet. So it went from 70 to 52 and windy. So I was in a just shorts and a t-shirt. I get up there, freezing my bones off because that was 52 degrees when I was used to 70, and that was Tierra Fria. Basically, long story short, the higher you go in elevation, the lower your temperature is. It's called an inverse relationship. Vegetation, they're really good climate, so they grow a lot of things. Almost anything in the world, really, that any crop in the world can be grown in South America. Some good crops, and then they also are one of the world's, or Colombia is the world's leading producer of cocaine that gets sent all over the world because of it's grown on the ground, part of the cocoa bean plant, and they add chemicals to it, but that's where it's grown. That's where it originates, is down in South America. But other good things would be bananas and other fruits. They have a lot of cattle grazing, like I said. But here, this term is called a canopy. The canopy is in the rainforest, and that is a term given to areas where the sun never touches because the canopy is so thick. It provides a constant shade for plants and animals inside the Amazon rainforest, and that's what the canopy term means. All right, so this is probably, to me, this stuff's a little bit more interesting. The kind of history and the ethnic background of areas. There's about 500 million people living in Latin America. It is bigger. It's about 160 million people bigger than the United States of America. But no one country down here is bigger than the United States. In fact, there's only 2 countries in the world bigger than the United States, and that would be China, number 1, and India, number 2. So about 10% of the world's population is from this region. It is like the ultimate melting pot because before the Europeans arrived, it really wasn't a melting pot. There was what we call the indigenous population, the Native Americans, and they didn't mingle with any other continent. South Americans, indigenous population, didn't mingle with South and North, didn't mingle at all. So it was really not a melting pot at all. But then we have the Spanish come over, the Spanish conquistadors. They don't bring many women with them. So what they end up doing is sometimes like doing it out of love, but sometimes out of force. They would marry indigenous women, have children. Those children will be called, we'll learn this term if you don't know it yet, or mestizos. Is a mix of Europeans and natives. You also have, because of the fact that the Indians or the natives died on such an alarming rate because of the European diseases, the Europeans, who also didn't have enough people to work the land and didn't want to work the land, they then turned to Africa. So the huge population of Latin America are direct descendants from Africa. And then today you have Asians that have kind of come over in bigger numbers because the two biggest countries, China and India, have so many people. Sometimes people will leave those countries looking for jobs elsewhere, and so you'll see an influx in certain countries. Certainly, the Asian is not like a huge. It's not like 40% of the population is Asian. It's just like a small percentage of the population. And then Caucasian, like what you and I would be, that would be a little bit more rare, or I should say you and I, but there are some of us, we're pretty cool because we are diverse. We have people of African American descent, we have Asian descent, but for the most part, at Brosser, our demographic is Northern European. And so there's not as many full Northern Europeans like there are up in North America. In South America, you have the biggest population, is what they call mestizo or Creoles, which are people that are born or have European ancestry in them, and they also have some type of native ancestry. So Brazil is a really cool soccer team. We're going to go ahead and skip this. Well, I'll ask you, what country has the highest percentage of Europeans? And that is Argentina. But this was a page from an old book, so we'll skip that. Skip this one. All right, so the ethnic diversities. Native Americans were the first to settle Latin America. We know that they came down from the Bering Strait and then eventually make their way all the way into Central America and then eventually further down into South America. The major Indian groups, the major historic Indian groups of this region, we had the Aztecs up here, which we took notes on. This was a group called the Mayans. If you remember, I think it was 2012, they said the end of the world was coming. Thankfully, it didn't happen. Some people think the end of the world was going to happen in 2020. Thankfully, we are still together and going through this crazy COVID year, but it was all the Mayan calendar was a big thing that they said that the Mayans predicted the end of the world, and they had predicted a lot of things correctly before, so people were freaking out. Myself, I didn't really think it was going to be the end of the world. I was pretty content. I was going to wake up the next day and be okay. The Incas are down here. They had a bigger empire than the Aztecs. They were actually more impressive than the Aztecs and a more impressive government. The Aztecs were kind of like warriors and intimidators and bulliers. They conquered a lot of territory. They made people give them tribute, including humans, so that they could sacrifice those humans. But the Incas, they were a really amazing empire. They were militaristic, but they were more, I would say, cultured than the Aztecs were. And so this is just a few things about the Mayans. They were around from 200 BC to 900 AD, so they had about 1100-year reign. Great civilization. They developed the only complete form of writing in the Americas. They had two different calendars. One was their sacred calendar, which is 260 days. Then they had an agricultural calendar. They did know about the rotation of all the planets around the sun. They had an agricultural calendar that was 365 days. In some Aztec pyramids, they have four-sided pyramids, and each step represented a day. And to keep track of the days, some different civilizations would put like a stone on a step, and then they would know what day of the year it was. So they were very highly intelligent. A little bit more about the Mayans, just about any ruling class up to this point. Even the United States of America, we've only had one woman vice president ever, currently right now, Kamala Harris. But we have women in other leadership roles. But the Mayans, most of their leaders were male. The kings interpreted the gods and offered human sacrifices. Jaguar was their sacred animal. During the 900s AD, the Mayan civilization began to decline. Some believe that they were conquered by another tribe, which would be common. The Aztecs is who you remember, probably because of human sacrifice, more likely. They had this crazy myth that wherever they saw an eagle standing on a cactus eating a snake is where they would build their empire. and they built it in the city called Tenochtitlan. It is present-day Mexico City. It was literally in the middle of a swamp, but they built this amazing city there. They have canals crisscrossing the. Let's see, show you this picture here. They had canals crisscrossing all the the roads, kind of, so to speak. They had floating gardens called chinapas. They were really militaristic. I mean, they weren't. Sometimes people think they weren't cultured and they were barbarians or idiots. They couldn't have been further from that. If you look at this, all this uh, architecture, they had to go with creating canals, floating gardens, Aztec temples. I mean, they were geniuses. Now, did they do human sacrifice? Yes. One weekend, they possibly could have sacrificed 40,000 people. 40,000. That is what some archaeologists believe is the number of skeletons they found that were indicated that they sacrificed all those people in one time. They had crazy rituals, and their most common way that they would sacrifice you would be to cut your chest open and rip out your heart, and then throw your body down the steps as an offering to the gods, because they believe that the sun went to bed every night and had to fight darkness in order for it to rise. And did they do men? They sacrificed men. Did they sacrifice women? Yes, they sacrificed women. And did they do children? Yes, they sacrificed children, because their tears, because children would cry the most, their tears were gifts to the rain gods. So, not exactly a bunch of bros I'd want to hang out with, but it does not mean that they weren't intelligent or didn't have their own culture. They just practiced something that today we look back and say that was pretty horrific. And I would hope if I lived during that time, I would say this is probably pretty horrific too. But those were the two. Kind of went through a little bit of their religion there. Their sacrifices were to please the gods. Oftentimes, their sacrifices were people from war. And then the Incas down here, last but not least, the Incas, we go on days and days and days on the Incas. They were amazing. They built the city of Machu Picchu up in the Andes Mountains. It was amazingly impressive, and then they just left it. And so we'll get into that a little bit. But both the Aztecs and the Incas were conquered within a few decades of each other in the 1500s. The Incas held off a little bit longer than the Aztecs, but in the end, they both get conquered, and the Spaniards take over this whole entire area except for Brazil. And so I will stop it here, and I will put this video up, and you should be pretty much done by now.